Twisted Vow, the Scapegoat Bride of the Mafia Dawn. Chapter 1 The Bargain Bride and the Hidden Secret. Dust bled over the iron-gated hills of Sterling Estate, staining the manicured lawns in bruised indigo and burnt amber. The autumn wind cut sharp through trim hedges, carrying the metallic cold that clung to every corner of the upper-class enclave, a cold that matched the man who was about to arrive. Luca Voss was coming. He ruled the entire downtown underworld with blood and iron. Gambling dens, hidden ports, underground capital flows, enforcement crews with guns hidden beneath tailored coats, everything answered to him. No law, no noble lineage, no political threat could touch the Voss empire. And tonight, he stepped into the Sterling household to seal a marriage built not on affection, but on transaction. The Sterlings were old money, polished and hollow. They wore aristocratic grace like a mask, while their ledger books reeked of great deals and backdoor negotiations. Allying with Voss would cement their decaying status in high society forever. There was no debate over who would wear the bridal veil. Lila Sterling, the golden daughter, the family's pride, their most precious bargaining chip. For 20 years, the Sterlings had drawn Lila in luxury. Custom couture arrived at the manor monthly. Diamonds locked in velvet safes glittered only for her. Relatives praised her beauty, her pose, her flawless aristocratic manners at every banquet. She had never known rejection, never borne blame, never felt the sting of being invisible. In stark contrast stood Elara Sterling, the half-sister, the scapegoat. While Lila slept in a silk-draped master suite with a view of the fountain courtyard, Elara resided in a cramped attic room under the sloped roof, where winter frost beat the walls and summer heat trapped the air like an oven. Her dresses were hand-me-downs, faded at the hems, stitched repeatedly where the fabric thinned. Her meals were the leftovers from family dinners, cold and sparse. Her purpose in the household was simple: absorb every misfortune, every mistake, every displeasure that the golden daughter and the prestigious family could not afford to carry. A shattered antique vase. Elara's fault. A guest's wounded pride after a clumsy toast. Elara's negligence. A stalled business negotiation across the ocean. Elara's bad luck. Her innate curse. She had learned early to bow her head, to stay quiet, to shrink into the shadows so thoroughly that guests often forgot a second Sterling daughter existed. Tonight, she stood in the far corner of the grand marble hall, tasked with buffering silver tea sets and polishing cutlery for the welcome feast. Her thin linen uniform scratched her skin, the cuffs bore faint, neat stitches she had sewn herself by candlelight the night before. Her small hands gripped the heavy silver tray until her necks ached. Her frame folded inward as if she could physically shrink away from notice. Up ahead, before a gilded vanity mirror framed with baroque carvings, Lila prinned without restraint. She fluffed her spiral-curled champagne hair, dusted rose-tinted powder across her high cheekbones, and admired her own reflection with the unshakable confidence of someone who had never once been told no. "He will adore me," Lila murmured to her own reflection, tone laced with haughty certainty. "No powerful man can resist a privileged golden daughter like me. Luca Voss is ruthless, yes, but he is still a man." Mr. Sterling adjusted the lapel of his cashmere suit beside her, his jaw tight with barely concealed ambition. "This union elevates our family beyond old money. We will stand beside the underworld throne. You are perfect for him, Lila. Your grace will tame that cold brute." Elara would only disgrace the name, Mrs. Sterling added coldly, flicking a stray thread from Lila's bridal rehearsal gown. "She belongs in the shadows. Always has, always will." Elara heard the words. She always did. They were spoken openly, carelessly, as if she were a piece of furniture unable to understand human speech. Her eyelashes trembled, but she did not lift her gaze. She had long ago mastered the art of swallowing hurt. A low, distant engine roar cut through the conversation. The entire house stilled. Outside the iron gates, a motorcade rolled into view, three bulletproof black SUVs flanking a single matte black limousine, No logos, no flashy embellishments, only quiet, lethal authority. The vehicles glided across the cobblestone drive without a single harsh sound, stopping precisely at the main staircase. The door of the limousine opened. Luca Voss stepped out into the twilight. Tall, broad-shouldered, his frame honed by years of combat and control. His bespoke black suit fit every line of his musculature without excess, the only ornament a tiny silver pin engraved with the Voss family crest hidden beneath his collar. His hair was raven dark, styled sharply, emphasizing the angular hardness of his jaw. But it was his eyes that froze every breath in the hall. Amber. Cold, translucent amber, like shards of frozen fire. They saw through lies, through facades, through the polished performances of the wealthy. Bodyguards fanned out behind him, their stances rigid, eyes scanning every window, every pillar, every shadow for threats. No one dared meet Luca's gaze directly. He ascended the marble steps and entered the grand hall. His amber eyes swept across the room in one slow, unhurried pass. First, the waiting Sterling parents, their polite smiles stretched thin with greed. Then Lila, who instantly tilted her chin, parted her lips in a practiced seductive smile, and shifted her weight to display her figure performing perfection for the Mafia king. Luca's gaze moved past her in less than a heartbeat. As if she were nothing more than a painted mannequin. Lila's smile faltered, confusion flickering across her face before she forced it back into place. He was merely being reserved, she told herself. Cold men play hard to get. Luca's gaze locked elsewhere. On the corner. On Elara. In the 10 seconds before his entrance, while the household staff had turned toward the gates in commotion, Elara had witnessed something no one was meant to see. Hidden behind a carved Roman pillar, Lila had slipped a folded slip of encrypted paper into the pocket of a stranger's black coat. The man did not belong to Luca's security detail. On his cuff, stitched in scarlet thread, was a coiled serpent, the symbol of the Carranza syndicate. The Voss family's oldest, bloodiest enemy. Elara had frozen instantly. Her fingers had clamped down on the edge of the silver tray so hard her knuckles blanched white. Shock, fear, and desperate conflict flashed across her face for a split second before she masked it, but not quick enough. Luca saw it all. He had spent years navigating betrayal, deceit, and calculated false emotion. He could spot a genuine reaction from a performed one in an instant. The panic on the Scapegoat sister's face was raw, unscripted, real. Lila's flirtatious pose was a mask. Elara's fear was truth. Luca paused mid-step, his attention anchored on the quiet girl in the corner. The air around him sharpened. The entire room felt the shift, though none could name its cause. Elara's heart hammered violently against her ribs. She ducked her head, terrified of being noticed, terrified of what she had seen, terrified of what the Mafia lord's unblinking gaze meant for her. In that moment, beneath the surface of a political marriage agreement, a deadly hook of betrayal sank deep into the flesh of every secret in the Sterling manor. Chapter 2: Hollow Lies and Silent Endurance. The evening tea reception was held in the glass conservatory at the rear of the mansion. Floor-to-ceiling crystal panels enclosed the space, trapping warm air inside while twilight darkened the garden outside. White camellias and tropical orchids bloomed along the polished stone ledges, their sweet fragrance masking the sharp tension simmering between the two parties. Luca seated himself at the head of the glass table, his posture relaxed but dominant, the aura of a man who held all the cards without needing to display them. Lila took the chair directly beside him, positioning her body to catch the fading golden light through the glass, ensuring her features looked soft and angelic. She intended to charm him into submission before the wedding even occurred. Your family's coastal shipping routes have expanded this fiscal year, I understand, Luca said casually, picking up a bone china teacup between his long fingers. His tone was light, conversational, but his amber eyes never softened. It was not small talk, it was interrogation. Lila smiled brightly, her answer rolling off her tongue rehearsed and glossy. Indeed. Father has been broadening our transatlantic reach. The routes are stable, profitable, and perfectly positioned to integrate with Voss logistics after our marriage. I oversee all core contractual negotiations personally. Luca nodded slightly. You are familiar with confidential cargo manifests and gray fund ledgers, then? A micro flash of panic crossed Lila's eyes. She knew nothing of cargo manifests, nothing of gray funds, nothing of the dangerous underbelly of her family's business. She knew galas, guns, and how to manipulate wealthy men with smiles. But she did not falter. Intimately. I've been groomed for this since childhood. I'll be an invaluable asset to your syndicate, Luca. Luca sipped his tea slowly. He knew she was lying. 3 months prior to this visit, his private intelligence division had begun a full, invasive background audit of the entire Sterling family. Every transaction, every conversation, every hidden correspondence had been tracked, recorded, decoded. Lila had no hand in business operations. She had never read a single confidential contract. What she did have, however, was a prearranged deal with the Carranza syndicate. After the marriage, once she held the official title of Voss wife and gained access to restricted network rooms, port blueprints, and underground capital pathways, she would leak every piece of classified intelligence to Luca's enemies. In return, Carranza would deposit a limitless offshore fortune into her private accounts, enough for her to live in obscene luxury for 3 lifetimes, independent of both the Sterlings and the Vosses. The Sterling parents were fully aware. They had encouraged it. Their plan was simple: let Luca be the sacrificial pawn. If Voss fell to Carranza, the Sterlings would profit from the winning side. If Voss survived, they retained their powerful son-in-law. Either way, the family won. Luca's empire, his safety, his life, none of it mattered to them. The wedding scheduled for sunrise tomorrow was not a celebration. It was an ambush. Hidden Carranza gunmen were positioned in the chapel rafters, behind decorative floor walls, beneath the guest pews. The moment Luca signed the marriage covenant, signaling legal binding to the Sterlings, the hit would trigger. The Voss leadership present would be eliminated in one coordinated strike, crippling the entire East Coast operation overnight. Luca knew all of it. Yet he gave no sign. No anger, no suspicion, no warning. He simply listened to Lila's hollow lies and stored them away as evidence. Minutes later, Elara entered the conservatory carrying a brass teapot filled with steaming chamomile brew. Her task was to serve the inner circle guests without making eye contact or sound. Her nerves were frayed raw from the secret she had witnessed. The image of Lila slipping the note to the serpent-embroidered messenger replayed in her mind on a loop. Her fingers trembled. As she leaned forward to refill Luca's cup, her wrist slipped. Scalding hot tea sloshed over the rim of the pot and spilled directly onto Luca's exposed left wrist, searing through the thin black dress shirt. A bright, angry red burn bloomed across his skin instantly. The teapot clattered to the stone floor, cracking into jagged white shards. Hot liquid spread across the polished surface. Before Elara could stammer an apology, Lila erupted. Her refined composure shattered into venomous fury. She shot to her feet, voice shrill and cutting across the quiet conservatory. Clumsy trash! She shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Elara. You stupid, worthless thing! You nearly burned Luca Voss. Do you have any idea what you've done? Father, punish her immediately. Lock her in the attic without food or water for 3 days. Mr. Sterling's face darkened with rage. He opened his mouth to unleash the usual torrent of humiliation and blame upon the designated scapegoat. Luca raised one hand. The gesture was minimal, silent but absolute. Every person in the conservatory felt that silent. Mr. Sterling's words died in his throat. Lila's furious gasp caught mid-breath. Even the rustle of orchid leaves seemed to still. Luca pushed his chair back and stood, He ignored the stinging heat of the burn on his wrist entirely and walked toward Elara, who had gone rigid with terror, her shoulders hunched in instinctive preparation for pain. The tall Mafia Don bent his broad frame down until his mouth was level with her ear, shielding their exchange from everyone else with his body. His voice rumbled low, deep with the resonance of a man who commanded lives with a single word. Why do you endure endless blame for mistakes that were never yours? Elara flinched. No one had ever asked her that. No one had ever acknowledged that her suffering was unfair. Her lower lip trembled violently. She bit down hard to steady herself, her voice barely audible over the distant wind outside the glass walls. Disobeying my family brings worse trouble, she whispered. It was the truth she had lived by her entire life. Resistance only made the punishment heavier. Silence and submission were the only survival tools she possessed. Luca straightened again, his expression slipping back into cold, unreadable neutrality. The moment of private warmth vanished so abruptly that the others might have imagined it. He dismissed the incident with a slight nod. The girl made an accident. No punishment necessary. Lila burned with jealous indignation, but she dared not contradict him. The tea reception ended shortly after, the atmosphere thick and unspoken. Midnight descended over the sleeping estate. In Luca's temporary suite, on the third floor, his encrypted military-grade terminal pinged. A file arrived from his lead investigator, irrefutable proof. Audio recordings of Lila negotiating with Carranza agents. Offshore bank draft confirmations for her post-betrayal payout. CCTV footage of the pillar note exchange. Decoded transcripts detailing the chapel assassination layout. The treason was complete. The trap was undeniable. Luca stared at the screen, his amber eyes emotionless. He did not feel anger. He felt resolve. The sunrise wedding would proceed exactly as planned. Only the bride would change. Chapter 3. He carried her out. No one dared stop him. Dawn painted the sky pale ivory and rose over the sterling chapel garden. The outdoor venue was breathtakingly beautiful. Ivory roses twisted up the Gothic archway, sheer white silk drapes billowed gently in the soft morning breeze, and tiny fairy lights glimmered between the blooms like trapped starlight. String musicians tuned their instruments near the fountain, ready to play the processional march. Beneath the beauty, death waited. Carranza gunmen lay concealed within the floral installations, behind trim hedges, and inside the hollow beams of the arch. Their weapons were silenced, their aim calibrated, their trigger fingers resting steady. They awaited the precise moment the marriage vow was spoken to open fire on Luca and his corps lieutenants. The Sterlings watched from the VIP front row, masks of proud contentment fixed on their faces. Inside, they waited eagerly for the bloodshed that would secure their fortune. Lila stood behind the arch, dressed in a masterpiece of French lace and hand-sewn crystal beading. Her bridal train spilled 3 meters across the dewy grass. Her veil obscured half her face, lending her an ethereal, saint-like glow. She closed her eyes briefly, drinking in the imminent triumph. Today she would become Luca Voss's wife. Today she would gain unlimited power, wealth, and revenge against the sister who existed only to make her look better. Today the underworld king would belong to her. To the side of the venue, hidden from guest view, Elara worked silently. She wore a plain, faded gray maid's uniform, devoid of any decoration. The fabric was coarse against her skin. The household staff had ordered her to tidy the guest seating before the ceremony began, forcing her into the role of invisible labor on the most important day in the family's history. She had not slept all night. The memory of Luca's quiet question haunted her. Why endure blame that is not yours? She did not have an answer. She only knew that the air felt wrong this morning, heavy, charged, dangerous. Every rustle of the wind sounded like a secret. Every hidden glance between guests felt like a threat. The music swelled to its ceremonial peak. All conversation ceased. The entire assembly of high society guests, criminal observers, and Sterling relatives turned toward the red carpet aisle. Luca Voss stepped forward. He moved with unhurried, predatory grace down the center path. His black suit cut a sharp contrast against the blinding white wedding decor. His bodyguards marched in formation behind him, forming an impenetrable secondary perimeter outside the guest rows, unknown to the hidden Carranza men who fought themselves unseen. Lila's heart surged. She lifted her chin, parted her lips in her most mesmerizing smile, and prepared to meet him halfway. Luca walked past her. He did not slow. He did not glance sideways. He did not acknowledge her existence at all. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd like a breaking wave. Lila's smile froze so violently her facial muscles ached. Her eyes widened in pure, disbelieving shock. The veil fluttered slightly as her head jerked after him, unable to process what was happening. Luca continued straight to the edge of the aisle, where Elara stood frozen beside a row of chairs, her cleaning cloth slipping from nerveless fingers. Before she could speak, before she could bow, before she could vanish into the shadows as she always did, Luca slipped one arm beneath her knees and the other around her back. He lifted her effortlessly into his arms. Elara gasped softly, her hands flying instinctively to his chest to steady herself. Her wide, startled eyes locked onto his amber gaze. She looked small, fragile, utterly out of place in the arms of the most dangerous man in the city, a maid in grey linen held by a mafia king beneath a wedding arch built for her sister. Luca turned toward the stunned crowd, his voice amplified by the chapel sound system, deep and unshakable, echoing across the entire garden. I will not marry a deceitful traitor who seeks to burn my empire to ash. Every breath in the audience caught. Lila Sterling has colluded with Carranza. She planned to leak classified intelligence to destroy my syndicate the moment this vow was sealed. Her betrayal is proven, documented, undeniable. Lila's mouth fell open. Denial burst from her throat in a broken scream. That's a lie. I never. Luca's tone did not shift, cutting through her hysteria like steel. I take Elara Sterling with me instead. Chaos exploded across the venue. Mr. Sterling roared, face purple with rage, stepping forward as if to storm the aisle. You cannot do this. The contract is signed. The bride is Lila. Lila collapsed into hysterical tears, screaming so loud her voice cracked. Why her? Why the West? I'm the one you were supposed to want. You can't choose her over me. Mrs. Sterling wailed, clutching her husband's arm, aristocratic dignity discarded entirely. This will ruin us. Luca, you cannot break the covenant. Guests rose from their seats, shouting, murmuring, filming the catastrophic scene on hidden phones. The hidden Carranza gunmen tensed, ready to open fire amid the confusion only to realize they were surrounded. Luca's secondary security teams, pre-positioned overnight, closed in on the floor beds and rafters, locking the assassins in place before they could pull their triggers. Not a single person moved to stop Luca. Not the Sterling family guards, who owed their salaries to the estate but feared Voss's bullets more. Not the household servants, who had witnessed Elara's abuse for years and dared not defy their master's true power. Not the noble guests, who understood instantly that crossing Luca Voss meant a death sentence. His bodyguards formed an impenetrable wall around him and the girl in his arms, black suits locking shoulder to shoulder, weapons subtly visible beneath their jackets. Luca began walking toward the waiting motorcade, carrying Elara firmly against his chest. Mrs. Sterling's desperate cry chased after them. The contract is legal. You cannot discard it. Luca glanced over his shoulder, his amber eyes cold enough to freeze blood. The contract is torn up. Your golden daughter forfeited every privilege the moment she conspired with my enemies. The girl you discarded, the scapegoat you broke to keep your perfect image clean, she now holds my favor. Elara buried her burning face into the hard warmth of his chest. The tears she had held captive for 20 years spilled free, soaking into the tailored black fabric of his suit. Her body shook with silent sobs. For the first time in her life, she was not the one being thrown away. She was the one being protected. Luca carried her past the screaming family, past the stunned guests, past the trapped gunmen, and placed her gently into the back seat of his limousine. He slid in beside her, and the door sealed shut, cutting off the entire world behind them. The motorcade pulled away, leaving the shattered wedding and the ruined Sterlings fading in the rear window. Chapter 4: The Truth Behind His Eyes. Luca's penthouse occupied the entire top floor of the tallest skyscraper in downtown, a glass fortress 300 meters above the city chaos. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the space, offering an unobstructed view of the sprawling metropolis below. At night, the streetlights and vehicle headlights merged into a river of golden light, distant and detached, as if the penthouse existed in a realm separate from the world of man. The security was military-grade. No unvetted person could enter. No listening device could function. No surveillance camera could peer inside. Here, Elara was completely safe from the Sterlings, from Carranza, from every person who had ever hurt her. Yet for the first 3 days, she remained trapped in the reflexes of a lifetime. She bowed her head when he entered the room. She automatically reached to clear the plates after meals, as if she were still a maid. She flinched whenever his voice lowered, conditioned to expect shouting or blame. Her body had been programmed for submission after 2 decades of being the family scapegoat. Luca did not rush her. He did not demand confidence, or force boldness, or tell her to simply stop being afraid. He understood that trauma was not erased by kindness overnight. On the 4th evening, as the sunset dyed the sky crimson and violet, he poured 2 glasses of deep red wine and gestured for her to join him on the observation sofa. Facing the windows. "You think I chose you yesterday, on impulse," he said quietly. It was not a question. Elara looked at him hesitantly, her fingers curling around the stem of the untouched glass. "I was there. You had no reason to notice me before that day." Luca shook his head. The amber of his eyes softened, no longer the cold glare of a dawn, but the focused gaze of a man who had watched her for a very long time. "I had been watching you for 6 months. Elara's breath caught. "When my team began investigating the Sterlings ahead of marriage negotiations, everyone's report labeled you irrelevant," Luca explained. "A neglected half-sister, emotionally damaged, socially invisible, no political value. My man almost wrote you off entirely." He tapped the tablet resting between them. The screen lit up with encrypted footage, projected onto the glass window beside them. The first clip was taken on a brutal winter night months prior. Snow whipped through the dark alley behind the Sterling estate. Elara, wrapped in a thin threadbare coat, knelt on the frozen pavement repairing a broken space heater for a group of homeless people camped near the estate boundary. Her fingers were blue with cold, her breath fogging in front of her face, yet she persisted until the unit hummed to life. Then she handed over the paper bags of bread and hot soup she had smuggled from the kitchen. "You helped the invisible people," Luca said. "The ones no noble would ever acknowledge." The second clip showed a terrace confrontation. Laura had snatched Elara's handwritten ledger draft and torn it to shreds in a jealous rage. Elara simply knelt silently on the stone tiles and gathered the torn paper. No anger, no retaliation, no vengeful words. She returned to her attic room and rewrote the entire document overnight. "You endure cruelty without becoming cruel in return," Luca murmured. The third image was a photograph taken inside Elara's attic bedroom, beneath her thin mattress. Hidden there was a complete, hand-coded financial journal. In tiny, precise handwriting, Elara had mapped out the Sterling family's hidden revenue streams, falsified tax reports, and untraced grey money pathways. She had taught herself advanced forensic accounting entirely alone, using discarded textbooks she found in the estate storage. You possess a genius for ledgers and risk analysis, Luca said. The same talent my syndicate needs to clean its corrupted internal accounts. You are not useless, Elara. You are the most valuable person in that entire manor. Elara stared at the projection, her throat tight with suppressed emotion. All the quiet, unrecognized parts of her, the kindness, the resilience, the hidden intelligence, had been seen by him long before the wedding day. The marriage proposal to Lila was never genuine, Luca admitted plainly. It was a trap. I needed the Sterlings to reveal their full betrayal, to draw Carranza into the open, to collect irrefutable evidence so I could dismantle both sides legally and violently. You were never a replacement bride. You were my intended choice from the moment I saw your ledgers last winter. The truth settled over Elara like warm sunlight after a lifetime of shadow. She was not second best. She was chosen. While Elara processed the revelation, Luca's retribution moved across the city like a silent storm. He released the full archive of evidence to federal financial task forces, underground alliance networks, and high society gossip outlets simultaneously. Lila's treason, the Sterling money laundering operation, the smuggling ring hidden within their shipping routes, the decades of tax fraud, all of it exploded into the public sphere overnight. The Sterling name collapsed instantly. Business partners severed contracts en masse. Luxury brands cancelled their lifetime sponsorships. Elite social circles blacklisted the entire family. Banks froze all assets. The mansion was seized pending federal investigation. Lila's ending was the sharpest irony of all. Carranza cut all ties with her the second the wedding ambush failed. Without the promised intelligence leak, she had no value to the syndicate. The offshore fortune she had been counting on vanished. Stripped of her family's wealth, her title, her beauty team, and her admirers, she was forced to move into a cramped, run-down apartment in the low-income district downtown. She took minimum-wage service jobs to survive, forever tormented by the memory of the throne she had come so close to claiming. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling lost their social standing entirely. They became pariahs, their past corruption whispered about at every elite event they could no longer attend. They aged rapidly under the weight of their own mistakes, trapped in modest retirement housing, forced to live the ordinary life they had always considered beneath them. The golden daughter fell to dirt. The discarded daughter rose to light. Chapter 5: Ledgers and Longing. With the Sterling threat neutralized and Carranza's attempted ambush neutralized, Luca turned his focus inward to his own syndicate. For years, the Voss underground empire had grown bloated with hidden corruption. Mid-level lieutenants siphoned funds. Regional port managers falsified cargo logs. Old alliances drained resources without contributing profit. The system was powerful, but messy, vulnerable to the exact type of betrayal Luca had just survived. Elara became his most trusted auditor. Working from a secure home office in the penthouse, she applied her self-taught forensic accounting skills to untangle the decades-old web of capital flow. She traced hidden embezzlement trails that had eluded Luca's professional analysts for years. She identified double-agent staff members embedded by rival crews. She restructured the entire bonus and commission system to eliminate loopholes for internal theft. Where Luca ruled with ruthless force, Elara ruled with precise order. Together, they balanced the empire. As they worked side by side each night poring over digital ledgers and physical account books, the quiet respect between them deepened into something warmer, something softer. Luca, who had never hesitated to kill or threaten to protect his power, learned gentleness through her. He learned to pause before speaking sharply. He learned to anticipate her flinches and soothe them before they took root. He learned that strength was not only destruction, it was protection. Elara, who had spent her life shrinking into corners, learned confidence through him. She discovered that her opinions mattered, that her intelligence was admired, that she could speak without fear of punishment. She stopped bowing her head. She started meeting his amber gaze without hesitation. Their love was not the passionate, performative romance found in society ballrooms. It was quieter, deeper, forged in secrets and survival. It was late nights reviewing spreadsheets together. It was Luca leaving her favorite wildflower honey tea on her desk each morning. It was Elara reminding him to rest when his work drove him to exhaustion. It was two people who had both known loneliness finding home in the same quiet space. One clear, brilliant night, the city below completely still under a blanket of unobscured stars, Luca brought Elara out onto the private rooftop terrace of the penthouse. The air was cool and soft, scented with jasmine from the planters lining the railing. No bodyguards stood nearby. No surveillance recorded the moment. It was only them, the endless sky, and the sleeping city spread at their feet. Luca took her left hand gently in his own. His skin was calloused from weapons and years of enforcement. Hers was soft, still bearing the faint old scars of needle pricks from mending clothes as a child. From his pocket, he withdrew a ring. It was not an oversized, flashy society diamond. It was a custom-cut cushion stone set in muted platinum, brilliant but restrained, crafted specifically to match the quiet elegance of the woman who would wear it. He slid it slowly onto her ring finger, where it fit perfectly, as if it had always been made for her. Luca leaned forward and pressed a tender kiss to her forehead, his breath brushing her skin. For 20 years, you were the scapegoat for everyone's failures, he whispered, the words meant only for her soul. You carried their shame, their mistakes, their cruelty, so the golden ones could remain unblemished. Elara's eyes glistened with starlight reflected in her tears. From today onward, Luca vowed, his voice steady as an oath, you are my cherished partner. Every part of my power, every soldier under my command, every resource in my empire exists to protect you. You will never carry blame again. You will only be loved. Elara lifted onto her toes, closing the small distance between them, and kissed him softly on the mouth. It was a kiss without fear, without debt, without transaction. It was pure, free, reciprocal love. Beneath the infinite stars, the girl who had once been thrown into the dark was crowned with light by the king of the shadows. The wild weed that had grown in cold attic darkness had finally been nurtured into a rose blooming only for the man, who had seen her worth long before the world ever dared to look. End of novel. Chapter 6 Ghosts of the Attic and the Unspoken Debt. The ring on Elara's finger glinted like a quiet secret every time she tilted her hand under the penthouse lights. It was not the blinding spectacle that high society women craved, but that was precisely why it belonged to her, understated, unyielding, forged for someone who had spent a lifetime hiding in plain sight. In the weeks following the proposal, the city settled into a fragile peace. Carranza's surviving cells lay low after the failed wedding ambush. The Sterlings faded into impoverished obscurity. The Voss syndicate operated with tighter discipline than it had in a decade. To the outside world, Luca Voss had tamed his empire, claimed his quiet bride, and closed the chapter on his bloodiest feud. Only the four walls of the penthouse knew the cracks beneath the calm. Elara's trauma did not vanish with a ring and a promise. Though she no longer flinched at sudden songs or bowed her head when Luca spoke, residual ghosts from the Sterling attic lingered in small, unguarded moments. She still portioned her food meticulously, conditioned by years of cold, scarce meals to fear scarcity even when the penthouse pantries overflowed. She folded her clothes each night with the same tiny, neat stitches she had mastered repairing hems in the freezing attic, unable to leave fabric creased or torn even when she owned endless new garments. Most haunting of all, she still reflexively accepted blame when something went wrong: a misplaced document, a delayed delivery, a minor error in a ledger before she could remind herself she was no longer the family scapegoat. Luca noticed every micro-movement. He did not confront her with grand speeches. He observed, catalogued, and wove small acts of correction into their daily rhythm. When she divided her dinner into tiny, restrained portions, he slid half his own serving onto her plate without comment. When she stayed up late stitching loose threads on a cashmere sweater he owned, he sat beside her on the sofa, silent, until she finally set the needle down and met his eyes. When she whispered "It's my fault" after a junior analyst misread a market graph, he closed the ledger, turned her chair toward him, and placed his palm flat over her heart to still its nervous hammering. "This body does not carry other people's mistakes anymore," he said, low and firm. "It only carries its own truth." Elara nodded, but the words did not fully sink in. Healing, she was learning, was not a switch flipped by a lover's vow. It was a slow erosion of old reflexes, a daily battle against the voice the Sterlings had planted in her mind. "You are the flaw, the stain, the disposable one." The conflict surfaced publicly when the annual Eastern Elite Syndicate Summit arrived. The summit was an unholy fusion of high society and underworld diplomacy. Legitimate CEOs, crime lords, political lobbyists, and old money heirs gathered in a guarded waterfront ballroom to sign trade pacts, settle territorial disputes, and measure each other's power behind polished smiles. By unwritten rule, Voss always attended alone. His brutality and isolationist stance made him too dangerous to pair with a public partner until now. The invitation arrived addressed to Luca Voss, your fiancé. Elara Sterling was prospective. The wording was deliberate. The old families and rival syndicates wanted to see the discarded scapegoat paraded into their midst. They wanted to watch her crumble under scrutiny, to confirm that Luca's choice had been a reckless, sentimental mistake. Many had watched Lila grow up the perfect, polished golden daughter and could not fathom why the king of the underworld had chosen the invisible half-sister instead. "We don't have to go," Luca said the night before the event, tossing the embossed card onto her desk. "I can send a proxy. Their gossip is not worth your discomfort." Elara traced the platinum band on her finger, thinking of the years she had spent watching galas from the servants' corridors, never allowed to step onto the main floor. If she ran now, she would always be the girl who hid from the light. If she went, she would face every aristocrat who had ever ignored her, every guest who had laughed at the Sterling family's hidden scapegoat, every voice that had ever deemed her worthless. "I want to go," she answered. "Not for them. For the girl who never got to enter the ballroom." Luca's amber eyes softened with understanding. He did not argue. Instead, he brought in a private stylist not to reshape her into a copy of Lila's sparkling perfection, but to dress her in a way that honored her quiet strength. The final gown was midnight silk, cut with clean, sharp lines that hugged her frame without overexposure, the only embellishment a thin silver chain around her neck bearing a tiny Voss crest, the same pin Luca wore beneath his suits. No crystals, no billowing tool, no performative glamour. Just controlled, unapologetic power. On the night of the summit, the motorcade glided toward the waterfront ballroom, and Elara's pulse spiked when she saw the crowd lining the entrance. Cameras flashed. Socialites leaned in to whisper. Rival underbosses tracked her movement with cold, assessing eyes. The second she stepped from the limousine beside Luca, the whispers erupted like static. "That's the attic girl. The scapegoat." He traded the golden daughter for trash. Elara's shoulders tensed, old instincts screaming for her to shrink, to vanish, to apologize for taking up space. Before the reflex could take root, Luca's hand slid into hers, locking their fingers tight. His touch was not gentle comfort, it was public, a missable possession. A declaration. "Walk with me," he murmured only for her. "Look nowhere but forward." She did. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light over marble floors and white linen tables. Waiters circulated with champagne flutes. Jazz music hummed low in the background. Every conversation was double-edged, layered with hidden threads and unspoken bargains. The second they crossed the threshold, the room went quiet. Hundreds of eyes locked onto Elara, dissecting her gown, her posture, her composure, searching for the insecurity they expected to see. A moment later, the crowd parted for the evening's most influential guest, Hector Bourne, the oldest Alliance patriarch, a man who had mentored Luca's father and now presided over summit negotiations. Bourne was cold, traditional, and fiercely opposed to weakness in any form. He had publicly condemned Luca's choice to abandon Lila, calling it emotional reckoning that destabilized underworld order. He approached the couple with a goblet of brandy in hand, his gaze cutting directly to Elara. "Child," he said, his voice carrying across the nearby hush, "you have spent your life being blamed for what you did not break. Now you stand in a throne you did not earn. Do you not fear the weight of it?" The question was a trap. If she admitted fear, she confirmed she was unworthy. If she pretended confidence, she was arrogant and naive. All heads turned to watch her falter. Elara squeezed Luca's hand once, then released it, stepping forward on her own. The old instinct to bow died on her lips. She lifted her chin, met Bourne's icy stare, and spoke in a clear, steady voice that carried across the silent floor. "I fear the weight of unearned blame far more than I fear unearned grace," she said. "I carried the former for 20 years. I am capable of carrying the latter." Bourne's brow tightened. He opened his mouth to retort, but Elara did not stop. "You call this throne unearned?" she continued, gesturing subtly to the Voss crest around her neck. "I audited the Sterling family's hidden alliance ledgers last winter. I uncovered the 30-year tax diversion scheme your branch participated in with my father. The same scheme you publicly condemned the Sterlings for last month. I know your debts, Mr. Bourne. I know your lies. Do not lecture me on worth." A collective shock rippled through the room. No one had ever spoken to Hector Bourne with such unflinching candor. No subordinate, no peer, no rival. Certainly not a girl who had once been the most invisible person in high society. Bourne's face darkened, but he could not refute her words. The ledgers she referenced were buried, encrypted, known only to a handful of insiders. For her to uncover them proved her genius was not a rumor, it was a weapon. Before Bourne could respond, Luca stepped beside Elara, his arm sliding firmly around her waist to anchor her. His amber gaze swept the room, daring anyone to challenge the woman at his side. "Her word is Voss law," he stated plainly. "Whoever questions her questions me." The room remained silent. No one dared move. That night, Elara did not hide. She circulated the ballroom beside Luca, discussing ledgers with financiers, verifying trade routes with port managers, and dismantling subtle attempts to undermine the Voss syndicate with quiet, precise logic. She did not perform perfection like Lila had. She wielded truth. When they returned to the penthouse in the early hours of the morning, Elara finally let the tension leave her body. She leaned against the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the sleeping city, her reflection overlapping with the river of golden lights below. "I thought I would break in there," she whispered. Luca stood behind her, wrapping his arms around her torso, his chest warm against her back. He rested his chin lightly on the crown of her head. "You never break," he murmured. "You only shed the parts that were carved into you by others." Yet even as she bloomed into her new power, a shadow from the past crept back to test them. A residual loose and Elara had never named, a debt she had hidden even from Luca. Before the Sterlings collapsed, before Lila's betrayal, Elara had once been forced to deliver a sealed envelope to a low-level Carranza messenger on the estate grounds. She had been 14, too afraid to refuse, told it was a routine business note. She later learned it contained territorial coordinates that led to the death of 2 Voss foot soldiers. She had carried that guilt for 8 years, convinced she was indirectly responsible for the bloodshed, convinced Luca would hate her if he ever knew. It was the last secret she kept from him. And it was about to surface. Chapter 7 Blood, Death and the Final Confession. 3 days after the summit, a dead man turned up on the waterfront docks. His body was positioned deliberately against a stacked pile of shipping containers, hands folded over his chest, a single sealed envelope tucked between his fingers. The corpse belonged to a retired Carranza middleman, the same messenger Elara had delivered the envelope to 8 years prior. The cause of death was clean, professional, a single silenced bullet through the heart, the signature kill style of Voss's internal enforcement unit. When Luca's security chief sent the crime scene photos to the penthouse terminal, Elara's blood ran cold. She recognized the man instantly. The envelope found with the body was addressed directly to Luca Voss, and when it was scanned and decoded, the contents detonated the fragile piece they had built. Inside was a scanned copy of the 14-year-old delivery receipt Elara had signed at the Sterling estate, her childish handwriting looping across the bottom, dated the day the 2 Voss soldiers were ambushed. Alongside it was a blackmail note written by the last surviving high-ranking Carranza lieutenant, Jax Rayner. The note's message was brutal and uncomplicated. Your fiancée delivered the coordinates that killed your man. She has been Carranza's asset since childhood. Surrender the North Port routes to us, or I leak proof to every syndicate in the country. Let the world know your chosen rose is stained with Voss blood. Luca read the note once, twice, his amber eyes darkening into unreadable depths. He did not look at Elara immediately. He stared at the scanned receipt, at the faded signature of her younger self, and processed the timeline, the context, the manipulation hidden behind the old paper. Elara's knees weakened. This was the ghost she had buried, the guilt she had carried along for 8 years. She had always known the day might come, but she had prayed it would never land at Luca's feet. Tell me the truth, Luca said finally, turning to face her. His voice was not angry. It was empty, stripped of warmth, the cold dawn returning to the surface. Elara did not run. She did not shrink. She walked to the desk where the terminal glowed, placed her trembling fingers on the screen, and told him everything. She told him of being 14, locked in the attic for a week after a vase Lila broke, starved and cold, told she would be free only if she delivered the envelope. She told him she had no idea what it contained, that the Sterlings had lied to her, that she had learned of the soldiers' deaths weeks later and been too terrified to speak up. She told him of the years of silent guilt, the nights she had replayed that delivery in her head, the fear that the man who saw her worth would ultimately brand her a traitor. I did not betray you, she finished, her voice breaking only once. But I carried the consequence of someone else's betrayal. I let myself believe I was complicit because it was easier than admitting my family used me as a weapon. The confession hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. Outside the windows, the city continued to move, oblivious to the fracture inside the glass fortress. Luca was quiet for a long time. He traced the edge of the scanned receipt, processing the manipulation, the child forced into a deadly game, the sterling cruelty that had weaponized an innocent girl's obedience. He understood guilt. He understood being framed by family. He understood the difference between intentional treason and coerced complicity. Finally, he deleted the scanned file from the terminal permanently, erasing it from their private server. You were not an asset, he said, stepping toward her. You were a hostage. Elara's eyes flooded with tears. But the man died because of what I handed over. They died because the Sterlings and Carranza used a child as a pawn, Luca corrected, cupping her face in his calloused hands. Guilt assigned to you by others is not your burden to keep. I thought I rescued you from the attic's chains. Now I realize some chains were wrapped inside your mind. Today, we break them. His resolution ignited a two-pronged plan, neutralize Jax Rayner's blackmail, and erase the last ghost of Elara's stolen childhood. First, Luca deployed his intelligence team to trace Rayner's hidden network. The lieutenant had been in hiding since the wedding ambush, operating from a derelict cargo freighter anchored in the Outer Bay, beyond city jurisdiction. Rainer believed himself untouchable, convinced the blackmail leverage over Elara would force Luca to surrender the profitable North ports without violence. He underestimated two things: Luca's refusal to trade Elara for territory, and Elara's own strategic genius. Working through the night, Elara cross-referenced old Carranza shipping logs with the 14-year-old delivery date. She traced the funding trail that paid for the soldier ambush, uncovering that Rainer had personally authorized the hit, and had falsified portions of the blackmail evidence to make Elara appear willingly complicit. She compiled a full dossier proving Rainer's forgery, his unauthorized territorial attacks, and his embezzlement from his own syndicate crimes punishable by death under underworld code. Then she made the call herself. She contacted Rainer directly over an untraceable line, voice steady and unafraid. "You hold a lie as leverage," she told him. "I hold proof of your treason against your own syndicate. Release the blackmail, and I bury your dossier. Expose my past, and I expose yours. You will die before the sun rises." Rainer laughed, arrogant and unyielding. "A scapegoat girl cannot kill me." "I am not a scapegoat anymore," she replied, and ended the call. Rainer refused to back down. He scheduled a public press leak for dawn, intending to ruin Elara's reputation and split the Voss syndicate from the inside. But Luca's maritime strike team boarded the freighter an hour before midnight, guided by the coordinate data Elara had extracted from the old logs. The operation was precise, bloodless where possible, decisive where necessary. Rainer was detained before he could send the leak, his entire network dismantled in a single coordinated sweep. In the final moments aboard the freighter, as Rainer was taken into custody, Luca sent Elara one single text from the deck: "The debt is erased." Back at the penthouse, Dawn painted the sky the same rose and ivory hue as the day of the broken wedding. Elara stood at the window, watching the sun rise over the bay where Rainer's freighter now sat detained. The 8-year weight of hidden guilt lifted from her chest, light and irreversible. Luca returned as the first golden ray hit the rooftop terrace. He was still dressed in his tactical gear, the faint scent of sea salt and iron clinging to him, his hair wind-tousled, his amber eyes soft again, no longer the cold Dawn, only the man who had loved her through every hidden layer of her past. He led her back to the jasmine-scented terrace where he had proposed weeks earlier. The city stirred awake below them, alive and unbroken. "You carried a debt that was never yours," Luca said, taking her hands in his. "Today, the last of it is gone. There are no more secrets between us. No more ghosts from the attic. No more blood you did not spill." Elara leaned into his chest, breathing in the warmth of him, the safety of truth. She was no longer the girl who hid in shadows, who absorbed blame, who carried the sins of others to survive. She was the woman who had faced her past, dismantled her chains, and stood equal beside the king of the shadows. Luca tilted her chin up and kissed her, slow and deliberate, the vow in the touch more powerful than any spoken oath. It was a kiss that sealed the past shut and opened the future wide. Below them, the city belonged to the underworld. Above them, the stars belonged only to them. The wild weed had become a rose. The scapegoat had become a queen. And the dark king who had seen her worth would love her, unconditionally, for all the days to come. The weeks following Jax Rainer's detention brought a quiet, unshakable peace unlike anything they had known. With the last ghost of Elara's childhood that erased, the Voss syndicate entered a period of unprecedented stability, but true healing was not confined to battlefield victories or cleared ledgers. It unfolded in the quiet, unscripted moments that wove two fractured lives permanently into one. Born's alliance, humbled by Elara's public exposure of his hidden fraud, fell into line without further resistance. The old guard patriarchs who had once mocked the scapegoat bride now sent deference-laden communiques, their coded letters acknowledging Elara as the official co-ruler of the Voss domain rather than merely Luca's fiancée. It was a title she did not flaunt, yet one she wore with quiet authority, no longer needing to prove her worth to men who measured power only by cruelty and bloodshed. Elara's trauma, though stripped of its core secret debt, still lingered in the quiet crevices of her psyche. One evening, while sorting through archived estate documents recovered from the seized Sterling mansion, she stumbled upon a tattered leather journal tucked inside a locked oak chest, her childhood diary, hidden away by Mrs. Sterling when she was 16, deemed too self-indulgent for a girl meant only to be invisible. As she flipped through the faded pages, filled with scribbled fears, lonely prayers, and quiet dreams of being seen, her breathing fractured. Old, buried shame crashed over her, the belief that her loneliness had been a flaw, that her desire for kindness had made her weak. She retreated to the rooftop terrace alone after midnight, the journal clutched tight in her hands, silent tears soaking the worn leather cover. Luca found her there minutes later, having noticed her absence from their nightly ledger review. He did not rush to pull her into an embrace, did not speak empty platitudes to quiet her grief. Instead, he sat beside her on the stone bench, the jasmine scent wrapping around them both, and waited until she was ready to speak. "I wrote in here that I thought I was unlovable by design," Elara whispered, pressing a finger to a smudged line of teenage handwriting. "That the Sterlings made me broken so Lila could be whole. I thought it was my inherent nature, not their cruelty." Luca took the journal gently from her grasp, his calloused fingers brushing the faded script as if honoring the vulnerable girl who had written it. He had spent his entire life equating strength with violence, with erasing weakness before it could be exploited. But Elara had taught him a harder truth: strength was not the absence of brokenness, but the choice to bloom despite it. "They carved that lie into you," he said softly, turning the pages slowly. "But a chisel does not define the stone. You were never broken, Elara. You were compressed, pressured by years of cold and shadow until you became something far rarer than the polished, hollow gold of Lila's perfection. Diamonds are not born in light. They are forged in pressure." He opened the journal to the final blank page, pulled a silver fountain pen from his pocket, and pressed it into her hand. "Write the new ending. Not for the girl in the attic, but for the queen who outgrew her chains." Under the glow of the rooftop floodlights, Elara wrote slowly, deliberately. She wrote of freedom, of chosen love, of a life unburdened by the sins of others. She wrote not as the Sterling scapegoat, but as Elara was the name that would soon be legally hers, a name tied to protection, respect, and belonging, not shame. When she finished, Luca closed the journal and placed it in a locked display case inside the penthouse, not as a reminder of pain, but as a monument to survival. Their formal wedding arrived on a mild autumn morning, 3 months after the summit and Rainer's fall. It was nothing like the chaotic, performative spectacle the Sterlings had planned. No elite guest list, no hidden gunmen, no gilded lass. Only a small gathering of Luca's most loyal lieutenants, a handful of reformed alliance leaders, and no trace of the family that had discarded her. Elara wore a custom ivory gown woven with subtle silver thread, its lines echoing the midnight summit dress she had worn to claim her power, soft, but unyielding. The Voss crest was stitched into her veil, no longer a borrowed symbol, but a birthright she had earned. During the Voss, Luca omitted the traditional contractual phrasing that bound Mafia marriages to power and obligation. Instead, he spoke words written only for her, his amber eyes never leaving hers as the wind carried jasmine across the rooftop. "I vow to bear every lingering ghost you cannot outrun alone," he pledged. "To turn your old reflexes of shame into new instincts of pride. To rule this empire beside you, never above you. Ours is not a twisted vow born of bargain. It is a true vow, forged in seeing each other's darkest parts and choosing to love them anyway." Elara's vows were quieter, rooted in the quiet wisdom only a survivor could hold. "I vow to trust the safety you give me, to stop carrying weight that is not mine, to lead with the truth I spent a lifetime hiding. I vow to love the cold, broken boy who learned gentleness for me, as fiercely as you loved the invisible girl who learned to shine for you. When they kissed, the city below stirred gently, unaware that the most powerful pair in the underworld had sealed a bond stronger than any blood oath or territorial treaty. After the ceremony, they walked the penthouse corridors hand in hand, no longer hiding from shadows, no longer fearing the past. Elara no longer flinched at sudden movements, no longer automatically absorbed blame, no longer folded her clothes with the frantic precision of a girl fearing cold nights in an attic. She was home. Fully, unapologetically, permanently home. The underworld still hummed with danger. Rivals still plotted in the dark. Old secrets still lingered in the hidden corners of the city. But none of it could break them now. For they were no longer two lonely souls surviving separately. They were one, the dawn who learned to soften, the scapegoat who learned to reign, bound by a love that had turned twisted fate into an eternal, unbreakable vow.